let's turn our attention to a topic that's crucial in today's ever-competitive marketplace. Innovative pricing strategies, staying competitive in pricing wars will be the title of our next session. In a world where consumers are bombarded with endless choices and price comparisons, how do businesses stand out without simply slashing prices to unsustainable levels? How do we craft pricing strategies that not only attract customers, but also retain them over the long haul? Join our speakers as they shed light on this. Let's give it up for Vincent Allen, founder and managing director of VAAV Industries, and Haroon Cohens, founder and CEO of Goshen Development. Let's give them a round of applause as they make their way to the stage.
So we got the pick of it. How you guys doing?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, guys. This was a great panel. I think before we get started with what we're here to talk about, I think I did this yesterday in my keynote. I'll do it again today. We're in March, so if we can just give a big round of applause for not just the ladies that were just on the panel, but all the ladies in the room for all the things you do and all the things you guys have to go through. Let's just start there. So Haroon, we'll start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, your company, et cetera, and then we'll dig in.
Sure. So my name is Haroon Cohens. I am born and raised in Mile High City, Denver, Colorado. I've been in real estate development for the last 15 years. I started in finance and now doing real estate development. And I started there in an urban area called 5 Points in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how about your company? You're in real estate, right?
Yes, I'm in real estate. And so Goshen Development was born out of the desire to see the neighborhood which I grew up in to be cultivated. And so there was a lot of transition in the neighborhood over the last 10 years. I seen that before it was starting to happen. And I wanted to, because I was in finance, I was running a bank branch in my neighborhood. And I wanted to be a part of the process of cultivating a neighborhood rather than transitioning a neighborhood. Because I think there's a difference.
100%.
Yeah.
So for me, my name's Vincent Allen. I run a company called VAAV Industries. We're primarily a production company, but we also do a lot of engineering, related to construction processes. So like all these lights and cameras and the mics and sound systems and stuff that you'll see in both the commercial and residential spaces where people want screens on walls and these kinds of things, and integrate the broadcasting and the live streaming and stuff with the AV stuff, which is not as easy as you'd think it would be.
Right.
But yeah, let's just dig into it. I mean, we're here to talk about how we stay competitive today.
So tell me a little bit.
Yeah.
How did you get into that?
Well, so for me, I started when I was very young. My mother was involved in theater, and my father was in the United States Coast Guard, and so we moved around a lot. So I got to see a lot of different communities. And then I picked it up little by little when I was small. And then after a certain point, I kind of had my own vision on what I wanted to do and got into theater, lighting design, broadcasting, camera work, and was fortunate that to be right place, right time, when I was coming up, so when the internet really started getting going,
right.
and I was able to see the writing on the wall from years out that eventually, a centimeter at a time, all these different things were moving together. Like everything was going to be on a hard drive or on a computer or somewhere, something in the cloud somewhere. And I just continued to do the work and continued to do the work. And eventually, like anything, like you in finance, you work hard enough, long enough, eventually people will start saying your names in rooms you're not in, right? And that's how I got to where I am personally. The reason I started my company is this little girl sitting over here. Her name is Naomi. It's my daughter. And she started getting into all the tech stuff, and I saw how, from being a practitioner in my field, how difficult it can be for women trying to get going in a technical field, because we don't assume that girls like computers or things of that nature, right? We just don't do that. Look in the toy store. All the stuff that's colored pink, none of that stuff is any of the stuff that is a technical thing. You see like Bob the Builder, you don't see Susie the Builder, right? And all of that kind of stuff. But then the extra layer on that is how difficult things can often be for people of color to just get a foot in the door, right? And so that was the reason I started my company, was to build something that would move the needle forward so that not just her, but everybody has it a little easier and you know, going forward. And so we've been building for that for a few years. That's how I got started.
That's good, because the reason I asked that question is because, you know, I think that the outcome of the subject we're going to talk about, you know, the genesis of a business story is very important.
Of course.
Because when we talk about pricing and competitiveness, there has to be something bigger than the outcome of a transaction. And so it sounds like this was born out of the passion, experience, and history, and also bringing a solution.
You know, 100%, and that's why, you know, I come and do things like this, and that's why I bring her with me, so she gets to see. But I think it's important to get those stories out there and have those conversations, because I think a lot of times people can just be a little unaware of what other people are going through, right? With good, bad, or otherwise, you know, right? And so that's a lot of sort of the raison d'etre for why, you know, I do these conventions, and we do these talks and, you know, live streams and podcasts to try to talk about the technical expertise, what we need to do going forward in my industry or yours or any of them, right? But then also what we need to do as a society, so you know, everyone has a fair shake.
Awesome.
So let's, having established who we are and why we're here and why we're up here on a panel, or why anyone should listen to anything we have to say, right? Let's start talking about how, you know, the actual subject matter, which is pricing strategies and things of that nature. So you have a finance background, so I think that's perfect, right? Sure. So talk to me a little bit about how you, now that you're in real estate and doing development, how you A, sort of set your pricing strategy, and then B, in a time when money is often funny the last few years, right? How you stay competitive in your industry, and when you've got so many people, like the real estate market's been all over the place the last couple of years, and so your hedge funds get involved on some kind of stuff. How do you do that?
Well, I think the big thing is, you know, when you talk about pricing and also being competitive, back to kind of why the genesis of my question is I think you always have to have a vision and an outcome that you're looking for, right? Because of the market and because over the last 10 years, you've seen commercial real estate, multifamily, even mixed use be at the forefront. When challenges come, you know, usually the folks and businesses that didn't have a long-term plan, those are the ones that are the first to go. Right. So first, I think, you know, when you talk about competition, you have to have a vision before you engage in competition, right? Because longevity is about the vision more than just the outcome of an exchange of a transaction. Sure. And so I think that's number one. Number two is as you're looking at when things are in a boom cycle, everyone's able to sell. When you're in a downturn cycle, is what solutions are you bringing to the table? Sure. Right? Yeah. And so how you stay competitive is how are you bringing solutions? How are you also making sure that you're innovating through these changes? Right. And then three is who are you? What's your brand? Right. Because the brand is going to be the thing that folks are going to exchange, whether it's in commercial development, whether it's in widgets, whether it's in exchange of services. Sure. Anything really. That's correct. I think for my industry, it's a little different, right? Because especially in today's world, it's been challenging, honestly. When I first started building out a production environment, was a $300,000 to start proposition. Yeah. You know, back in the day, if you wanted to build out a broadcast studio or a green screen studio, any of these kind of things, I mean, you're really talking about $1 million investments to get going. And so that anytime you have to do that, I mean, it really truncates the pool of people who are trying to do it, because it costs money. And when you're doing a creative thing, there's not exactly an immediate ROI, right? So if you're making a movie or doing a stage play or doing anything, you know, you're not necessarily seeing the return on that immediately. So you're saying the barrier to entry in the beginning is just crazy high, right? Yeah. And now in today's world, I was actually having a conversation with someone earlier this afternoon about it. I'm working on an article I'm writing talking about what sort of like the influencer economy gets wrong, right? Because you have someone who is an influencer and whatever their thing is, you know, it could be anything, right? And they will invariably go and start presenting themselves as an expert about a thing, and they've spent $1,200 on equipment. Right, and usually it's this kind of stuff you get at Walmart on clearance, right? Because that's what they can afford, which is fine. It's a fine place to start, but the barrier to entry is so low now that you have everybody presenting themselves as an expert. I'll tell a quick little story as an example.
years ago, I had a friend of mine from college. She was trying to get herself set up as a photographer, right? So she had a relatively nice camera and some things. She didn't spend a huge amount of money on it, but it was a competent piece of technology. But her pricing was so low because in her mind, she didn't perceive herself as an expert yet, so she was pricing it low and then giving off all of these add-ins for little or nothing, right? Basically gratis. And multiple, practitioners in the field came to me and be like, you got to talk to her. Right? Because she was charging $400 or $500 for a photo session and on a functionally unlimited amount of editing, which is not the way the business is run, right? And then it was impacting the marketplace in her neighborhood because you had other people who were charging $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 for a similar kind of situation, and it was really problematic, right? And I think that gets like this whole influencer thing is we have a lot of people out there now because of social media that pretend like they know and they really don't. And when you hire someone to do whatever the thing is and they haven't gotten to that 10,000 hours already, right, you are subsidizing them doing their guess and check. Like, remember when we were growing up, we're doing the math and it's the guess and check, and at some point you're just guessing to try to figure out the answer, and then you just get tired and flip to the back of the book. Right. With the influencer economy, to a degree, is we're all subsidizing amateurs, figuring it out on the fly, and then figuring stuff out because they haven't got to that 10,000 hours.
So let me ask you this. So with the flood of influencers at the various levels, right? Sure. Professionals, those that have done the 10,000 hours, right, as you're saying, and then those that are just very intermediary, and then those that are beginners. How does a person in that field distinguish themselves in the sense of, one, their brand, and then how do they also compete with all the other things from a pricing perspective?
I think, so I think it's two things going on. So when I started, the way you differentiated yourself was your portfolio. Okay. Your body of work. And I think that's true in any field, right? That's what a resume is for, right? And so that's how, back in the day, that's how you differentiate yourself. Now, there's certainly still some of that, but what's happening today is it's more about views than it is about quality, right? And so it really is a double-sided thing, right? Because it's like, do I want the brand sponsors? Do I want the 200,000 followers and the brand sponsorships that are going to come with that? Or do I want to just do work and toil away and do really great projects and make my money that way? It really is a question of how you want to make your money, right? Yeah. And so as a filmmaker or as a broadcaster or any kind of someone in a creative field, there are lots of people who toil away for decades. No one ever knows their name, and they're perfectly fine with that, by the way. Most people behind the camera are there because they don't want to be in front of the camera, gotcha, right? And so it just is dependent on how you want to make your bones, right? And you can do a little bit of both. You can dabble in a little bit of both. The challenge then becomes when you're just doing the behind the camera work and are not necessarily trying for the 200,000 followers or to do that kind of thing, is how do you set price?
Gotcha.
Right? Yeah. Where does your rate card end up? Like, how much am I going to charge for a half day, a day, a 2 day, whatever your metric is? Where do I set that number at a place that is going to be high enough that you're not doing scrounge work to try to make ends meet, in a place where content creation at a place where the rent is so high. I live in a place where the rent's high. I live in New York City. So to how you do that versus a number that's too high, where then you have problems with sticker shock.
Gotcha. Right. Gotcha. Well, I think, we take some of the same things in account, right? You have, over the last 10 years, you've had many institutional investors, new folks coming into real estate because they say, hey, listen, this is how much I think I can make on a project. And I think what has happened over time is you've had people that have come into the industry and then leave the industry very early because of that same thing, right? They haven't put the 10,000 hours in. And I believe one of the other things is there isn't anything that is innovative. It's not bringing a solution. So right now, of course, at the top of the list across the country, we're talking about affordability.
Right.
Right. Anyone can build a multifamily project, but now how do you bring affordability to the game and still be able to make money and still be able to be in business for the long term? And so for us is, how do you tackle that challenge? And that's what differentiates us from other developers, is we're focused on middle income housing. And so let me just give you a little example. 2 years ago, we helped pass a legislation in Colorado. SB 232 was a bill, is the creation of the first middle income housing authority for a state in the nation. And so for us, it's innovation goes with pricing and our strategy. That differentiates us between some of our competitors. And for us, it's a solution-based approach rather than just the pricing approach.
Right, and I think that cuts across industries, right? Yeah. Because if you're the guy or the firm that did that thing that everyone's talking about, then people are going to come looking for you, right? And then at that point, price, it's less about price and it's more about what's the client's need.
There you go.
And it becomes a like, you are the only guys I know who can get this accomplished in our timeline. Give me a number. Right. You know, like we had a lot of that where, like during the pandemic, I mean, we did a lot of work because everyone needed a live stream or a broadcast or a Zoom or a something during the pandemic. And one of the things we talked about yesterday, we innovated, was this technology called Skytron, and where you can have, like in a different setting, we might have a teleprompter in front of us, right? Yeah. And then so I can have the teleprompter in front of us, and instead of seeing words, you see the director who's telling you what to do, or telling you where to look. You need to speak up. You only got 5 minutes left, and this and that. And that technology was used for everything from History of Swear Words on Netflix to Oprah's Soulful Sunday Conversations. We worked on that and built that out. And then once you do that kind of stuff, then people start knocking down your digital, door about like, how can we do this in our organization? And so some of it is when you're doing really good work and it's getting out there and people are getting to know the work you're doing, the price becomes less important to a certain extent.
So brand is a part of it.
Oh, brand is definitely a part of it. There's no question. You have to always, people have to know who you are, right? Or who your company is. Like what's that the Baldwin quote from Larry Kilmer, always be closing, right? ABCs. You always have to be selling. And in order to sell, you have to have a brand, right? No one's going to just know to look for you if they don't know to look for you, right?
That's right. So brand is important. And I think across all industries, and we're finding that mostly now.
Yeah.
We, with the innovation of AI, with the innovation of more competition, brand is the differentiator that people are, not just the price, because I could do something cheaper.
Sure.
But what is going to attract the clientele? It's
interesting that you brought up AI, because this is a conversation we have all the time. We've started to see, at first AI, the stuff that was publicly available to individual consumers was very text-driven, ChatGPT, and things of this, Google's Gemini, things of that nature that can do, language models and then some limited other stuff. But now, we have Midjourney, and then Midjourney just released an update recently where you can have coherent characters that will, be continuous throughout whatever images you're creating, so you can, in theory, use that to do a storyboard, right? And we've seen other solutions that are out there that, in theory, can edit for you and do all these other things. A really good example of this is Adobe in Photoshop has a feature in there where you can rotoscope. So that's where you take the thing and you draw the little circle, whatever, around whatever image, and you can type into it and tell it, I want to be wearing a purple tie instead of the tie I'm wearing, and it will go, AI will do that. And it's pretty effective, actually. And so the conversation has become around like what jobs are going to get replaced or made redundant based on AI. And what I always tell people is that, let's like, look, this is like anything else, right? Once upon a time, you didn't have the internet, or you didn't have social media, we didn't have cell phones. And now we do, and in theory, that was going to take away all these jobs, and it didn't really, right? I mean, some people lost jobs, but people adjusted, and it created other ones. And I think from a pricing standpoint, where we will eventually land with all of that is you're going to have a two-tiered system, right? Where you will have, like, when you first started to be able to take high-quality pictures on a cell phone, right? Or when Instagram first became a thing, everyone was like, oh, the wedding industry is going to be decimated because all these people that made their money taking pictures of people's weddings and engagements and stuff, that was all going to go away. But did it? No, right? If anything, the people that are really good at wedding photography make more money now than they did before Instagram, because if anybody can go and just do a hashtag thing at the wedding and you just tag your pictures of the happy couple, then the people that come to you as a photographer are pre-qualified, warmed up leads, because I know you can go do that. So I'm not going to do this for you for $700.
Right.
So it changed things in a way, but in some ways it made it harder. In other ways it made it better.
So you're saying that in the sense of that staying competitive when there is changes, innovation, and being able to innovate and still be one high quality is going to help you rise above.
100%. I think the key is absolutely high quality. If you go back far enough, you can talk to, people in the recording industry, right? Before there was digital anything, everything was analog, everything was a tube, everything had to go into the studio. And then when Apple first released GarageBand, everyone was like, oh, everything's going to change. And in some ways it did. People have studios in their homes now, right? But it didn't change a need or a desire for an excellent recording engineer who could then edit all that stuff together, right? That's not necessarily an easy thing to do, right? And so I think it's to my way of thinking, it's primarily about being excellent. And then if you're excellent, people will recognize that there's always going to be someone who's going to do it for cheaper. Like that's always been the case since there's been capitalism, right? Like there's always someone who's going to see what you're doing as a developer, see what you did with the legislation in your home state, and go, yeah, but I can do it for $10 cheaper than him, and so you should come with us, and going to try to reap all the benefits of all the work you put in and undercut your price. And there are some people who will go with them, right? But
But over time, what they're going to learn is you pay almost what most often you're going to pay what you get for.
Yeah, no, I mean, I say this to people all the time. People come to me and they, we talk and I tell them what this is going to cost, and they're like, oh, they get sticker shock. And I say, well, listen, you don't get Mercedes-Benz performance for Toyota prices. It's just that simple, right? We all know that. Right? Nobody goes to the Mercedes dealership looking to buy a car for a Kia price, right? We all know that you get what you pay for in everything in life, right? And so that's kind of what it is for me. I mean, obviously you have to have common sense in your pricing schemes, right? It can't be like, I'm going to charge you $1 million for this thing,
right?
And then expect that you're going to have high volume, right? And that, to me, that's the key. Is you have to be reasonable about your pricing schemes. But if you're excellent, it won't matter. Right?
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell a quick story anecdotally. I've had a lot of these conversations in the audiovisual industry. So years ago, what you'd have these big installed systems where you've got like lights and custom furniture and all this sort of stuff. And those systems would be $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, sometimes $1 million a room. Mm-hmm. Those systems don't get built anymore. Cisco used to have a system called the IX5000. Cisco doesn't make that system anymore. They decommissioned it maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And it wasn't because it didn't work. It was because nobody was buying it. And the reason nobody was buying it was because Zoom came along. And the predecessor to Zoom, which was Blue Jeans and some of these other things, these web conferencing modalities came along. And I've had this conversation with so many executives at various AV firms all over the world. And it's like, you're not going to sell the $300,000 room and do the $20 million project for these, 20 relatively small conference rooms. You got to make it up in quantity. And so part of it is, like I said, being excellent, right? Setting common sense pricing schemes, but also like being able to like see and hear like in the old Western movies where the guy puts his ear on the railroad track or on the ground to hear what's coming. It's like when the ground is shifting beneath you, pay attention.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening right now with AI and all these different, VR and AR and all of these different things. It's shifting beneath our feet, and some people are paying attention, right? Like some people are going, okay, then I need to do my business a little different, right? And then other people are being like, no, everyone get back into the office. We're going to do it the way we always did it. And those companies, like very similar to when digital photography came out, right? Kodak owned the patent for that for 2 decades and did nothing with it. Someone in their lab invented the digital photography process. And what did they do? They shelved it because they were making so much money on the 24-hour and 5-hour and 1-hour photography. You go to your drugstore, hand in your disposable camera, and an hour later you got prints, right? They were making so much money off of that process that they said, we're not going to do this. It's going to undercut us. And what happened? Someone else invented a similar process. And a couple of years after that, I mean, if you go up to, Kodak was based in Rochester, New York. If you went to Kodak, to Rochester in the 80s or early 90s, it was a booming, thriving community.
Right.
Now there's nothing there.
So, and I think the big thing there is, one is always learn the market.
Yeah, 100%.
Always learn the market. Two is when you have innovation, don't be afraid to make the changes.
Right.
And then three, I think the next thing is, even when things are coming, right, you hear it coming.
Sure.
Don't jump on the fad. Because what I've seen also in the business is like, hey, we're starting to offer this.
Yeah.
And it's the fad, rather than being able to study and do your research and make the adjustments with the education of the process.
100%.
And so for many business owners, I mean, they're sometimes they jump on the fad. I mean, I know when NFTs were the big thing, everyone's jumping on it. This is the next wave. I think you have to have a balance of know what's happening. Don't abandon your core business yet.
Right.
But start to make the adjustments as you start to learn what's happening.
Yeah.
And so many people are afraid of making the adjustments. Either they're like Kodak, they're arrogant and say, hey, at the end of the day, we are the market.
Right.
And now they're not.
Right.
And then secondly, those that were also, that just jumped on the bandwagon, they're not here because they didn't do enough research. And I think you have to have a balance of, as you have your core business, pay attention to the core business, make the adjustments. Innovation is always going to happen. Don't always try to be ahead of the curve, but learn from what's happening in the curve.
Well, 100%. And I think that the best example of that is Apple. Like, I mean, they're the best example of a lot of things, right? Steve Jobs was brilliant and so far ahead of his time, it's a little silly. Like, if you look at the stuff they did with the Vision Pro that just came out, they have patent documents that go back 20 years. They started working on this 20 years ago and just quietly, an inch at a time, like a feature here, a thing there. And there have been VR headsets on the market for the last 10 years that a lot of people love, right? The Meta Quest is in its third iteration already. And Apple just said, hey, we'll throw something out. And it's not even the real version. It's a dev kit, right? And so I think that the example I take from Apple is that they're never the first to the market on anything.
That's right.
On anything ever. They're never, and a lot of times they're not the second either. Like, they wait for it. They start working on something when they see something moving. They wait for it to develop, and then they one layer at a time, they build an ecosystem. Like, do you guys remember when the iPod first came out? Almost 30 years ago now. There was no such thing as digital music players back then, but they saw a need. They worked on it. They released something. And then while they were doing that, they worked on the negotiations and the agreements with the record companies and the RAA and all these things to do something that now we take for granted. And then they did the same thing when the iPhone came out. They released the iPhone. There was no app store for the iPhone when it came out. But then a year or two later, it existed. And now the rest is history. And they're going to do the same thing with the Vision Pro, right? That's what they're doing, right? And so I think you live long enough, and if you're in business long enough, you see the trends repeat, right? And you talked about NFTs. Like, a couple of years ago, people were dropping millions of dollars on these things, and now it's like they're worthless, right? It's the tulip craze all over again, right? You see these things happen. Like, I mean, Wealth of Nations is a well-worn text, and it's in the public domain. Like, everyone should read it. That's how we do this. Capitalism. It's not rocket science, right? How do you guys do that in your market? Like, how are you looking to the future, but also staying relevant to what your core is, because the light bill's got to be paid today?
Well, I think the big thing is innovation is how do you build something with a more effective and efficiency, right? So modular is the thing people are studying. How do you build modular, not just on the home base, but also on multifamily, commercial spaces, things of that nature, right? But we're still on the cusp of some challenges in the modular space. And so for us is, how do you still pay attention? How do you have a refined, innovative approach? So you don't abandon your core business. I know some folks, just give an example, 6 months ago, I was talking to a group, one group who was out of Mexico City and partnering in Colorado, and they said, hey, listen, this is our approach. We're going down this direction. 6 months later, that partnership has dissolved because of the challenges, right? And so what I think is really for us is we don't abandon our core business. We're still studying it, right? So we partner with some other folks that are doing modular, but we're also integrating it at a pace, right? Hey, we're not going to abandon our core.
Sure.
We're going to continue to do great work, but we're also looking at this as an integration into our business. And so for us, it's a tandem approach. Is pay attention to what's innovative out there, but don't fully integrate it until you become an expert and be able to understand that this business model is going to work. You know, the delivery time, what's challenging for the modular is delivery time is the most efficient. However, costs are almost the same.
Okay, right. So interesting. I had a question for you about that. So we've seen over the last handful of years, you know, people talk about it on social media, but also build with it, is building these homes that are built around like a decommissioned shipping container.
Yeah.
Right. And some of these builders can do that quite efficiently because they're building around a prefabricated thing, right? But also quite cheaply, right? Because you're not doing all of the things you have to do to frame out a house and do all the things. Has that impacted your business at all?
It hasn't impacted ours. It's just because we do larger developments.
Sure.
So ours is, you know, multifamily, 40 units, 60 units, 90 units, 120 units. It's a lot harder to get the same delivery with that, right?
Right.
And so for us is how do you start to study this process, as I was saying earlier, but at the same time, how do we continue to deliver what is necessary and needed? And so some of the challenges that do exist is when you're dealing with, you know, 1 bedroom on 1 floor, 2 bedroom, and then you're dealing with plumbing and all that, some of those alignments don't work with the modular delivery, and especially with that delivery, but it is coming.
Sure.
So that is coming. That innovation is here. It's just there's still some tweaks to be made for
it's
that.
Process
it's
refinement.
a process, right?
Speaking of process refinement, how do you, in running your organization, right? Because process is everything. I think everyone here knows. Everyone here is running a business to some degree or another. Process is everything, right? If you don't have a process, you're not really doing anything. You're just sort of flailing, right? How does, in your line of business, how does your process impact the bottom line in terms of like what you charge and how the money you're making?
Well, I think the big thing for us in our business is, you know, real estate is all, you know, people ask, why'd you get in real estate? And I'm saying, we're all in real estate. We sleep in it, we live in it, we play in it, we're all in real estate. The big thing is for us is, it's about our process, but it's also about our core, is what solutions are we bringing to the table, right? And so our process goes from there. And so my partner, who's been a large-scale developer, has said, listen, we've been around the city, we've been developing large projects, but now what we see is unaffordability happening, right? And so for us, our process is now how do we integrate this different model that is going to continue to help us to grow in a more sustainable way. So sustainability is our process. And what I mean sustainability is not just the affordability on the low end, but the affordability in the full spectrum. So for us, our process is how do we continue to deliver great product that also everyone can participate in, not just at the top end, but also not just at the low end, but also in the middle.
All the way across,
That's the challenge.
How do you, so you talked about affordability, you talked about sustainability. One of the things that's been one of the biggest talking points that I've been aware of over the last handful of years in the real estate area is when these hedge funds started getting involved in buying up units that you're building or buying up even single family or double family homes to where now your landlord is BlackRock, right? Or Millennium or one of these large hedge funds. How is that impact? Has it, and if so, how is that impacted?
Yeah, I think the big thing is it has impacted everyone, especially in large cities, growing cities, because when investors are getting in, what is transpired is that on the for sale end, it is harder for new individuals, right? So when you have investors there, so one is the delivery for new units for your entry-level buyer, right? So that's number one. Number two is then it also, on the other end, it is creeping up the prices of housing for everyone, even on the high end. And so for us is, you know, we love investors, we love investment. I mean, we've been on both sides of the spectrum, but at the same time, what we're starting to see is this, which is, I'm not saying it is not just good for us, because at the end of the day, we're trying to bring a solution to it, but it's hard for the consumer.
Right.
So the challenge is we have unaffordability that is happening because now in the history of our great country, we have a lot of investors owning more of these residential assets than anybody else. And so so for us, it's how do you model for other developers being a solution, right? Not just looking at IRR, but looking at the community development, right? And so that's the thing.
Right. No, I think you see that a lot. We do, in addition to like the production stuff, we do a lot of things with large scale audiovisual, right? So some of that's high scale corporate, like, you know, corporate headquarters and things of that nature. But also there's a fair amount of residential stuff that goes on as well. And what always happens in large scale AV is that AV is the redheaded stepchild, right? They're always the last one in the room. Always the TV's the last thing to go up, you know. And so you end up seeing how getting sort of a view on where the money's going in an overall development or construction process. So it's interesting to hear you say that, because then what happens is you're trying to sell an AV integration, and those things aren't cheap, right? Like nothing in building a building is cheap. Everything has its price.
Especially today.
No, exactly. I mean, eggs are expensive today. Like, I mean, God forbid everything else, but then it gets back to that sticker shock thing, and I think we have to start having conversations about where we're prioritizing stuff, where the money's coming from, and the amount of time we spend on any given thing. Because I think a lot of times what I see is I'll get a project, and whoever the construction company that sold it will vastly undersell the project management time is a really good example, or the CAD time is another really good example, where they'll say, oh, we can do this in a day. And you're going, I can't draw a whole building in a day. Like, anyone who could do that is the most brilliant person in the world as far as I'm concerned. How do you, when you're developing a project, sort of work with that in terms of understanding, okay, I'm doing this, I'm going to send it out to bid, and 5 different, you know, construction companies are going to bid on it, about where your thresholds are in terms of how long something should take, or how much it should cost.
Gentlemen, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to cut you right now. We're about 15 minutes over, and we have an awards presentation.
Sure, no worries.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Please give them a round of applause.